Hello again. Dan also here today with kind of a side note on this discussion that I've begun having about capitalism and economics. And I will be returning this week with more descriptions and definitions of what I mean when I talk about these economic ideas and use terminology like capitalism, socialism, communism, monopoly, etc. In the meantime, I want to make a couple of points that I think might be useful that build on what I've already said. First, in the very first post, I talked about a hunter bringing back a large kill and sharing it. Partly my intent was to kind of remind us just how old these activities really are that led to these social and economic relations. It's also one of my first examples of specialization. And that's not to say that in ancient hunter-gatherer societies, most men, and probably even some women, wouldn't probably have joined the hunt. All the more so when the prey was something really big, like a mammoth in ancient America or an auroch in Europe. Megafauna was probably brought down either in team efforts or by use of some trick, like driving bison to stampede off a cliff. It's also worth remembering that although they were the smartest and most collaborative animals in their environments, ancient humans were typically not the apex predators. When humans arrived in the Americas, for example, they were met by not only those mammoths, but also by saber-toothed cats, cave bears, Beringian lions, and dire wolves. So everybody had to be pretty handy with a spear, I think. Even so, it is probably fair to suggest that some guys were probably better hunters, better able to read the signs, track prey, and reliably bring home kills to feed their families and clans and tribes. Other members of the clan or the tribe were probably better or more interested in catching fish and knowing their ways, their seasonal migration habits or runs. Others were good at finding edible plants, knowing what was safe to eat and what wasn't, and how foods might need to be prepared in order to make them safe and useful. For example, the valuable starch manioc, that in America we call tapioca, came from the roots of the cassava tree that people found in the Amazon region about 9,000 years ago. But the roots are mildly poisonous in their raw form. So the people who discovered them also needed to develop ways of removing the cyanide from the starch before they could eat it. Other ancient people in societies in Central America that were also on their way from being hunter-gatherers to being farmers put centuries of effort into transforming a native grass, teosinte, into maize or corn. Teosinte still exists today, and the branching plants produce a bunch of little seed heads with a dozen or so kernels on them. Corn, on the other hand, has a single thick stem that produces cobs with hundreds of kernels that incidentally stay attached until people remove them, which is a benefit for the people, but not so much for the plants because now they have become dependent on humans to reproduce. Think about the dedication it took to not only grow and harvest this teosinte, which was on its way to becoming corn, but also to carry on this selective breeding program over generations. Every season, saving the biggest and the best seed pods as they developed into ears to plant the following season. This is specialization, beginning probably before people even settled down permanently into villages and towns. Other people, as I mentioned in that earlier post, probably specialized in carrying products to markets and trading them, because they could be trusted, they were reliable, and probably also because they tended to be able to make the best deals. Others became skilled craftspeople. Others became healers or keepers of the tribe's stories, what we now call knowledge workers. Although, of course, all of these specialties required their own particular knowledge and skills. So my point is that although we typically think of specialization as a product of advanced economic thinking that involves ideas like comparative advantage, I think that these types of concepts might be more accurately understood as intellectualizations, that is overthinking, of really basic, common sense, human solutions to the fact that a lot of different things need to be done, and some people are better suited for or more interested in doing particular things. This actually lines up with something that the comedian Jimmy Carr said in his recent book, Before and Laughter, which I've just been reading. Carr asked 3 questions. What do people say is hard for them, but you find easy? What is something other people value that you can do? And what would you do anyway, even if no one paid you? And this is how you should pick a career, Carr advised. Elsewhere, he riffed on Malcolm Gladwell's idea that in order to master a skill, you have to spend at least 10,000 hours practicing it. Carr said, "What I think is interesting is why someone would spend 10,000 hours doing anything." He went on to say, "I see 10,000 hours as a litmus test of, do I love this enough to spend 10,000 hours on it? Because that's what the 10,000 hours is. It's the doing." Carr went on to say that he thinks it actually takes much more than 10,000 hours to really master anything, when you take into account all the watching and listening and thinking that goes into learning, which only really reinforces the idea that you gotta love it. One last note about this idea of specialization. It is a form of investment into whatever interests you the most. Effort is also a type of capital, as well as money, not to mention knowledge. I joked a bit earlier about knowledge workers, but this is significant. Nowadays, we have built whole industries on IP, or intellectual property. And we have whole categories of property law that mandate how IP can be protected, shared, traded, assigned, and used. These types of rules are a feature of all modern societies, whether they profess to be capitalist, communist, or anything else. Similarly, using earnings, profits, or wealth, that is the most traditional form of capital, to build more productive capabilities, this is done in all economies, whatever name they happen to give themselves. The difference between them may be in who gets to participate in the decision-making about those investments, or who gets to control the outputs. But the politics related to that maybe shouldn't be confused with the economic processes that are involved. And maybe focusing too much on that is an error that modern economists and modern economic textbooks have made. And I will have a lot more to say about that in the future. But this is what I wanted to talk about for today. So I hope you found this a little bit interesting. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you again very soon.